Welcome to the SPYPOINT Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Stevens, and I'm joined today by Lindsay Thomas from the National Deer Association. And today we're going to be talking about food plots. But before we get started, I just want to remind everybody to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get podcast information. Just helps us grow our audience and really grow the community. So welcome to the podcast today, Lindsay.
Brian, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Excellent, man. Listen, our paths have crossed in the past, not only with your brother and some of the other, individuals within your organization, and, just a high quality group of individuals with a mission to truly do some amazing things for the white-tailed deer population. And today I want to tap into some of that expertise, from yourself and talk about food plots, and may jump into some topics that are maybe more non-traditional, but just cover the gamut to just give everybody some insight around preparing for spring food plots, summer, and then moving into the fall.
Yeah, I love talking habitat and food plots any day of the week.
So. Absolutely. So let's jump in the first one. And I've got some notes here that I'm going to reference. So the first one is really talking about some of the non-traditional food plots. So maybe that sorghum, chufa, what are your thoughts on those types of food plots for, this time of year, or is there a better time of year for those types of, plots on your property?
Yeah, there's always some off the wall things you can try any time of year, whether it's warm season or cool season. We're going right now into April and May when we can time start planting some warm season stuff. And then cool season coming around again in September, October, earlier August for those in a little further north. There's always different things you can try. There's the old standbys, and then there's some things that can be useful, not necessarily because they're high protein and deer really desire them. Everybody's heard of soybeans and clover,
sure,
and really the sort of hot items out there when it comes to what deer really like. But at other times, different crops can be useful for different reasons. A good example coming up, you mentioned sorghum. Coming up in the warm season, grain sorghum is it's a grass species, but it grows up 4 or 5 feet tall, some varieties taller, and produces a seed head. It's very easy to grow. It makes deep structure, so it is good for good cover. So it's good for screening the edges of food plots. If you wanted to, if you've got an open food plot in open woods and you really want to give deer some comfort level out there in this plot, putting some kind of a visual buffer on the edge helps. Sorghum is good for that. You can plant strips around you could plant them this spring. It grows up, matures in late summer, and then kind of dies out, and you just leave it standing for your cool season plot out in the middle. It makes great cover. The other thing it is good at is for a warm season plot of like cowpeas or soybeans or lab, the viney legumes we grow in summer, it makes good ladder structure. A lot of times, a pure stand of cowpeas or soybeans or something, sometimes even sort of collapses down on itself. Not all the varieties can sort of stand up on their own, but you give it something to climb on, you get more forage production out of there. It climbs up the structure of the sorghum plant.
So that's when you say ladder structure, that's more literally thinking of it as a ladder to keep it off of the ground.
That's right. And I've seen plots, that are just a pure stand of cowpeas, deer plenty, they'll eat that. But you see wind or heavy rains come along, kind of beats it down, and it only grows so high. It can only climb on itself so high. But you put sorghum in there.
That's a great idea.
Or sunflowers or something that's a vertical structure. It can vine up and connect to and build on. Next thing you go, you've got neck deep deer forage out in there. So sorghum can kind of help hide those legumes because, frankly, as we all know, if you go out there and plant soybeans or cowpeas and you don't sometimes protect it early on, deer can kill a lot of that real early when they'll
mow it down. Yeah.
Right. So the sorghum can help hide it. So there's a good example of a off the wall species. Not everybody thinks of, sorghum, the deer are going to tear it up, but it's got alternative, indirect value in a food plot in a lot of other ways. It's also, like I said, easy to grow, tolerant of different soil species. Deer will eat the seed head, by the way, at the end of summer when it matures. And it's similar to corn as a grain. When that seed head matures, they'll just bite it off. So it's got nutritional value as well. So there's one I really like. A lot of people call it poor man's corn because it is easy to grow. You don't have to spray it and water it and everything else like corn can be high maintenance. Sorghum is not. So there's a good example.
No, that's a great example. And I love the idea of the ladder concept. And I've grown it in the past. And as I think back, that's exactly what it did in combining it with some of the soybeans and other plant species. So that's a great one. So if nobody has ever considered it, not just from a nutritional standpoint, but more of a structural standpoint to help the other, seeds that you have as they grow to flourish even, more effectively, that's a great idea. So
Yeah.
let's talk about, locations of food plots. What are your thoughts on, some people will have micro food plots, some people have staging food plots. They'll have, a throw and grow type of food plot. And then obviously you have your big traditional, location food plots where, you're going to bring in a lot of deer at one time. How do you go through and think about that? And I would imagine based on your property size, you have to have a strategy and size and location that may be different from a bigger piece of property versus smaller piece of property.
Right. And sometimes, people say who lease the land that they hunt may not have access to big open food plot areas. They might, a lot of people in the South lease timberland where
Sure.
there's not a lot of big open
No.
field.
Yeah.
And, what you might have might be a fire break or a logging deck or something like that. So you kind of have to make use of whatever openings you can. But if you have a choice, to me, it comes down to sort of the mission. And you almost, said it there, you were kind of heading in that direction, and that, you might have some of the bigger plots and look at those as more nutritional. You just want the deer eating in it, and you're not going to be hunting over it and deterring them from using that plot. You want them out there getting the nutrition and, all year round, and but particularly during deer season as well. But then the smaller plots come into your strategy. And the reason for that is we know from very good science, a lot of science, study on top of study with bucks out there wearing GPS collars, that bucks, particularly mature bucks, seldom use big open food plots in the daylight.
Yep.
They just know better. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a hunted plot, but especially a hunted plot. You're not going to see a mature buck out in an open food plot like that in the daylight very often. So, to understanding, that the effect of pressure and the desire of an older buck to be close to cover, to be close to escape,
Sure.
and away from big open areas and away from feeling like he's being seen.
Yep.
That's where you want to be looking for smaller plots, back tucked in close to heavy cover, in places like that. Especially if you manage your pressure and don't overhunt those spots, you're much more likely to see a mature buck in a spot like that. Now, it doesn't have to be small. It can just be the shape of it. For those watching the video, if in the background behind me, there's a photograph of a strip plot that's on my family's land in Southeast Georgia. And it's a meandering, winding strip food plot. It's one tractor width wide. That was planted with a grain drill. So it's about 6 to 8 feet wide.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, a couple hundred yards long. That's significant nutrition, but at the same time, because of the shape of it and its proximity to good dense cover out there in the thin pines on either side of it, we see a lot more daylight use of a food plot like that by deer. So if you've got a long linear fire break, those can be good for putting in food plots. The shoulders of woods roads, if they're getting enough sunlight, even in say a timber stand, whether it's pine or hardwoods that's been thinned, where some spots have opened up out there, or even rows where loggers have taken out rows of pine trees. Those rows often have enough sunlight in them to carry food plots, especially things like clover. Clover can do pretty well in lower sunlight levels.
So, and that's a great example. In that scenario, from a hunting standpoint, I know we're talking food plot strategy, but just since we're on this topic, looking at that exact food plot, Lindsay, how would you hunt that stand if you're bow hunting it versus rifle hunting it based on location? Because they could come out in a couple different directions and just eat and pass through. May not necessarily. So I'm imagine there's some thought and strategy behind how you would hunt it, not only how you plan it.
Right. Well, what I like to do with any food plot, whether bow hunting or rifle hunting, is I like to have a stand in a position so that you can hunt it and come and go without the deer knowing you got in the stand.
Yep.
If the
That's so
stand
important.
is right in the food plot,
Yep.
whether that's a permanent tower or whether it's a bow stand,
Yep.
and you have to walk into the food plot to get in it, that's not good,
Yep.
because whether it's dark before daylight and deer are out there in the plot, you've just blown them out of there, or whether it's in the afternoon and the sun's down and you're ready to go in and the deer, are out in the food plot. Either way, you've got to blow them out of there to get in or out of the stand. And that's going to, that's a pressure factor that's going to reduce visibility of deer in that plot, for quite a while, as long as you continue to do that. So it's nice, particularly with a rifle stand or a tower stand, something permanent you're going to build, or whatever, ladder, whatever it might be, position that back, 15, 20 yards away from the food plot or more if you can, so that in a way that gives you visibility into the plot, but with some good screening cover or whatever, you can ease in there and get in that stand, and deer that are in the plot never see you do it. That's the ideal situation. In a plot like the one in the picture behind me, long and linear, it's kind of curved in the middle. You could set up a position so that you can see down either arm of the curve, but again, not be, out in the plot. You can still do that with a bow stand. Obviously, you've got to get closer in to where the deer are going to be to get your shot. But finding little points of cover that allow you an access to that spot without blowing your wind into the plot, and getting in there, getting quiet, getting set up, that can still be done, with a bow. But again, your scouting there is going to come into the picture, knowing, what part of that food plot are deer entering, where are, the directional concerns, like if a mature buck comes in there, where's he likely coming from? Where's the nearest heavy cover that he's probably bedding in and hanging out in during the daytime? And, setting yourself up possibly even between there and the food plot rather than hunting the food plot.
And that's where game cameras will come into play and be super helpful. And even the cellular ones, or even not, but just that's where you can have that, eyes on real-time information and intel to help you. And that's a very good point, that can help you scout it without you having to actually be there.
Absolutely. Getting those cameras, particularly wireless cameras, in there in the right position where you don't have to check them regularly, and put your scent in the plot or the area to check it. And you're just getting your images on your phone. And that's an excellent way to know, exactly how deer are approaching and leaving a food plot.
No, that's good. So before we go to the next topic, I'm just going to ask, anybody listening, that if you have any specific strategies around, your particular food plots and getting in and out, and, making sure that you don't disturb, share that and provide some of that, experience that you have. Because Lindsay, that's one of the things I learned years ago is, finding that entrance and exit route to your stand and location plays such a big part of it. And sometimes you got to take the long way. Sometimes you got to take the way that's, the harder way to get in without being seen or smelled, because it just pays off. And, you may spook them and they may not blow, but they know you're there. And so you get a false sense of security that you got in there okay, and you don't see anything and you wonder why. And so that was something I learned years ago through a lot of mistakes. So again, great tip and, insight for everybody listening.
The other thing about pressure there is understanding the plot and its attractiveness, whatever crop you've planted, and not hunting until the deer are using the plot.
Yeah.
If your plot of fall cereal grains might be green and look beautiful, but if white oak acorns are falling heavily right then, I can tell you where the deer are going to be.
Exactly. Yep.
So if it's opening day, don't go sit in the food plot just because it's opening day. Go when the deer are using it. And if it means waiting, a few weeks or even months until, peak attraction of that plot for the deer to be in there, save your pressure until that time, particularly with things like brassicas that tend to become more attractive after cold weather hits, after things like acorns are gone. Saving that plot and not pressuring it until even post rut, that is a great way to set yourself up with a little area to hunt that doesn't have a pressure history and likely is going to have some deer using it, in particularly mature bucks.
That's a great tip. That again, we've all have made that mistake over the years, as you go where you just in the past thought you should go versus go where the deer are, where the food is at that particular time, and hunt it versus just going to, maybe that, the way we did it years ago kind of approach, and just being a little more strategic. So that's a great point. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about non-game impact of some of these food plots and, how it can impact, them and the habitat. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Yeah, there's a huge impact. And in fact, a few years back, the University of Georgia did a scientific study of this, looking at the impact of food plots on non-game species, whether it's songbirds or reptiles, amphibians, small mammals, the works, everything, all of
Hmm.
those things benefit from food plots. Often, the more cover they produce, the better. Something like, just a green cereal grain plot for the fall, it's just grasses, is not going to be as productive and attractive to non-game until later on when
Sure.
in the spring, when the wheat and oats or whatever it is begins to grow stalks, and then it gets denser. It becomes a place where, there's all kind of things going on there, insects, and then other animals come there to use those, birds, turkeys too. So there's a huge benefit. And then two, the edges of food plots that we've created often grow up in other species that we didn't plant, that are extremely beneficial, not just to deer and turkeys, but again, to all those other species. A lot of people worry about that. They feel like they got to spray those edges, or they're worried because some old nasty pokeweed or whatever is growing up in the edge of their food plot. Well, guess what? Pokeweed is 32% protein, and deer love it.
Wow.
If
Okay.
And it produces berries that the birds love.
I didn't realize that. That's
Yes.
okay.
So people look at it and go, "Oh, that's a quote weed. I need to spray that, don't I?" No, that's where, weed identification is really important in your food plotting, because a lot of the times things that are coming up on the edges of your plots, in those corners you missed with the disc harrow, or the corners you missed with your
Yep.
herbicide or whatever, people worry about that. "Ooh, weeds, I need to get rid of those." And a lot of times it's great stuff that the deer are
Okay.
eating too, and it's having benefits for non-game animals. Sometimes those weeds are out in your plot. And again, being able to identify them is important, because sometimes you can look at those weeds and go, "You know what, deer eat that. I don't need to worry about getting a backpack sprayer."
Okay. So great tip. There are things, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but are there places on the, website and, the portal and the different resources that you guys have through the association that people can, identify some of the weeds, or are there any, types of, guides, anything for people to understand what we're talking about here as far as food plots and the different species and weeds and things of that nature?
Yeah, there's all kind of resources. You got books. Nowadays you can get an app on your phone for plant identification. And a lot of times take a picture of something, upload it to the app, and it'll come back and give you an identification. So yeah, a lot of resources out there for that. We do cover a good many native plant species on our website that are, valuable, that people need to know how to identify. So, deerassociation.com is our website to browse some of that information. It's good for every habitat manager to know the native and the non-native
Sure.
species that are out there, because we've all got non-native invasive species that are out there where we hunt, and removing those and controlling those creates room for something beneficial to appear. So understanding the ones to encourage and understanding the ones to kill is always good. So get a good book, talk to your state forester, your
Okay.
state wildlife biologist who lives nearby. A lot of times they can come out and do site visits, walking through the property with you, helping you learn some of the most common. You don't have to be able to identify every single plant out there,
No,
but some of the
absolutely.
ones that are just most
Sure.
common, and most beneficial, learning 5, 10 of those, and adding a couple more each year, that'll really enhance your ability to make a place that's attractive to deer.
Well, and that's it. I mean, it's food, cover, and water. That's the basics. And I know there's a lot more to it than that. But if there are foods that are attractive year round, whether it be native grasses, weeds, and or supplemental food plots that you have, then you just are keeping those deer on your property or coming back to your property more regularly. So
That's
taking the time to understand those things that maybe you just weren't aware of could make the difference of some of those, does, bucks just hanging out and or coming back more often.
absolutely. Deer are eating something 365 days a year. And they eat about 2 to 5 pounds of forage a day, depending on body size, and that's in
Yep.
dry weight. So every day, and your food plot is not going to be that productive every single day of the year. There's no one species or
Correct.
blend you can plant that's going to cover all those days. Well, those other days of the year are covered by the plants that are out there naturally, native and some non-native species. But that you want to be encouraging those as well. You know, beyond the food plot's edge, look at the woods. Are they shady and growing nothing but dead leaves on the ground? Or is there some sunlight reaching the ground in those woods and producing some forage? If there's not, you know, there's things you can do to help increase the amount of sunlight out there in the woods, and ensuring, kind of like, again, referring to the picture behind me where you see it's a beautiful green food plot, but on the left and right of the plot,
thick.
it's fairly thick. You know, it's up to a head high on a deer. Some of that is stuff they don't eat, and some of it is. And it's so it's quality cover and quality nutrition beyond the food plot's edge. You know, making sure you do both covers every day of the year.
Good. No, that's great feedback. Let's talk about what are some of the biggest reasons that you have seen food plots fail? You know, what are some of the mistakes and or things that people that are listening could learn from that you've experienced in yourself, some of the research and or what you've seen from other managers and things that they've learned over the years?
I'd say number one is soil fertility. People just not doing the soil test, and it is just so simple, y'all.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you go out there, you gather a few samples of dirt from around the food plot, you mix them in a bucket, you put them in an envelope, and you take them to the county agent's office. $8 or somewhere in that neighborhood, you know, $8 to $10 is the going rate these days. And a couple weeks later, you get an email with your soil report, and it tells you exactly how much fertilizer and what type you need to put out there. So many people just wing it and they just guess, oh, let's go get a couple 100 pounds of 10, 10, 10 and throw it out there.
Sure.
Well, there might be a different analysis besides 10, 10, 10 that better meets the needs of that food plot. It might have plenty of phosphorus out there, but you need more potassium and more nitrogen. You don't know that if you don't get a soil test. Same with the acidity. You know, that soil test will tell you how much lime you need to add to adjust the acidity of the soil. If the fertility is not out there, the NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and if the acidity of the soil is not right, I don't care what you plant, that plant cannot perform to its potential. So adjusting the soil fertility right off the bat is the first thing. Do that soil test and don't guess on lime and fertilizer. That soil test will tell you exactly what to put out there. You know, the second thing I think that is a big cause of failure is weeds. A lot of people think clover is the way to go, but clover is a perennial and you have to kind of keep it up. You have to maintain it over the course. If you want to get multiple years out of a perennial, you got to care for it. Weeds is the number one thing that eats up most perennial clover plots and shortens their lifespan. So you got to learn how to control those, identify them, and select the right herbicides or management techniques to keep those under control. That's more of a problem with your perennial food plots. It's less of an issue with annuals that you're turning around each year.
Sure.
But regardless, weeds can be a problem. Another big one that causes food plot failure is the deer themselves. In the same vein of, you know, doing that simple soil test, another simple thing you should do is roll up a wire cage and stick it in the food plot after you've planted it. And it's called a browse exclosure. It's just a little cage to keep deer from eating in a certain spot so that you can measure how much they're taking away. A lot of times, you know, many times I've had people tell me, well, I planted something, but it just nothing ever came up. And when you look and see what they're talking about, it's plant stubble and deer turds. You know, the deer
mowed it down.
The deer mowed it down.
Yeah.
It's not that the plot failed. It's that, you know, a couple things are going on there. A, you've got too many deer, or B, you don't have enough food for those deer out there at a certain time of year, or both. So you've got to do something about that. You've got to increase nutrition, increase the amount of forage out there, whether you do that through food plots or forest management. And you may need to reduce the number of deer out there by shooting a few does. So, the deer often cause many plots to fail, particularly soybeans and cowpeas in small plots. If you've got high deer density and you're planting small little plots of cowpeas and soybeans, it ain't going to happen.
I've been there, done that. Been there, done that. You know, one of the things that I just would reinforce based on your feedback, and listen, when you talk about soil sample and using 10, 10, 10, I've been there, I've done it. I've tried to shortcut things over the years, and the results speak for themselves, meaning that there aren't any results. The times that I've taken the time, done the soil sample, done the things that you have said, I've been able to produce some really, really good food plots. And these weren't huge food plots, but they were productive. We guarded them, kept the deer out for a period of time, and it was amazing in what it did. So I just encourage everybody, if you're going to, take the time to put in the effort and the money for a food plot, do the soil sample, do the things that, Lindsay's talking about, because it will make a difference. And the other thing that I learned too, in doing some of these soil samples over the years, was picking 2 or 3 locations in that food plot to get the soil sample. Don't just dig one spot. At least you can tell me, what your thoughts on that. But, and I learned this from your brother when he came out and was working with me on some of our, food plots up here in North Georgia, was getting 2 or 3 locations and then putting those in a bucket and mixing up and then sending it off versus just digging one spot.
That's right. Take a bucket and a shovel, walk around, 5, 6, 7 spots, cover all the corners in the middle of the food plot, dig a little hole and slice, a shovel slice of about 6 inches deep, throw it in the bucket. When you get done with all that, stir that around, mix that bucket up good. You're only going to need about a double handful of it
Sure.
to put in the envelope for the county extension agent. And that's what you need to do. But yeah, it needs to be a good representative cross section of that entire field.
Yep. No, that's great. That's great feedback.
And the thing that people don't realize about lime, on the science of this,
Yes.
acidity. You can put all the fertilizer you want out there, but if the acidity is off, the plants can't take up the fertilizer and the nutrients that are in the soil. So you can put all the fertilizer you want, but if your pH is low or high, the plants can't optimize the use of those minerals. So don't skip on lime. You can't do it.
No, great feedback. Let's talk about a scenario where you've got a hunter that's moved into, maybe a new piece of property, or they've just hunted it, without any food plots over the years, or maybe it's a state where you can, legally supplemental feed and do those kind of things, but you recognize that that's not enough to keep and hold deer for, periods of time, and people just aren't doing food plots. What is your advice to them on how to get started? They don't have to necessarily hit a home run, but just to get, something going. There's obviously the equipment, what type of, seed location, within, the United States in which they're in, time of year. And so if there are just some things you could share with somebody that's wanting to do this, but a little intimidated, how would you suggest they go about to just get started and know that this is going to be a process over the years, that you're not going to maybe figure it out all the first year, but just how to get started?
Right. I'd say start with something relatively easy to grow so that you can get some experience, see how it works, and then build on that. A lot of people talk about clover, like I said, going back to what everybody thinks is, the hot thing for deer.
Mm-hmm.
They certainly love clover. They certainly love soybeans, but both of those, are not necessarily easy to grow. Whereas some of your annuals, particularly the cereal grains, and I'm talking about wheat, oats, and rye, they're very easy to grow, very attractive to deer. It turns around quick. You can have those things pulling deer in within 2 weeks of planting if you get the right rain.
Okay.
So they're fairly easy to grow. They're tolerant of rougher soils. I use those a lot in do-it-myself no-till food plots. Low rent no-till is what I mean. And because you can talk about no-till food plots with a grain drill, which is a big expensive piece of equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean no-till in the sense that almost no equipment was used at all, besides maybe a backpack herbicide sprayer and a hand crank spreader. So you can come into a small spot, a small fire break area, the shoulder of a woods road, some of those small areas we were talking about earlier. You could do a little small plot. You come in, you knock down any existing vegetation that's there, even if you have to bring out your push mower from home to do that, or a sling blade.
Sure.
You don't have a tractor or even a four-wheeler, let's say. So you knock down that existing vegetation. You bring a hand pump spreader or a hand pump sprayer or a backpack sprayer from your garden and spray that with glyphosate to kill that existing vegetation. You don't till it. You don't mess with it. You let the dead vegetation lay on top. It's kind of a mulch layer. And then when it's getting close to time to plant, you wait for a good rain. And on a day when you've got a very good chance of rain, and I don't mean 30% chance of mist, I'm talking about there's a thunderstorm going to hit this afternoon. Get out there, broadcast your seed right into that mulch layer, and let the rain settle it into the mulch, and you're done. Now, of course, you want to use that hand crank spreader or push spreader, whatever you've got from the lawn, to apply the fertilizer and lime before this. You've done your soil test, that still works, and you've applied your fertilizer and lime. But when it's time to plant, you wait for your rain, you cast your seed, and that's it. There it goes. Cereal grains, again, the oats, wheat, and rye are very good at taking off in a situation like that. They'll attract deer. So it's kind of a, low equipment level, beginners level food plot. You can, within a week or two after the rain, you're going to see the cereal grains coming up. You'll see the success you've had growing it. Put you a browse cage out there and watch as the browse cage fills up with forage, and outside you can then tell by comparing deer are eating your food plot. So that's just a great way to get your feet wet, learn how to do this, and then, expand from there if you want to. You don't necessarily have to expand. You can continue doing that in little small plots, and go from there.
No, I love it. I love it. And I just, check in with everybody. If you have, examples or pictures or, stories that you can share with this type of getting started food plot, share them with us, post them, and, help, our fellow audience members, learn from what you've done in the different parts of the country as well. Lindsay and I come from the Southeast and, very familiar with this part of the country. And he's obviously familiar with, all of the US, but there's different strategies on maybe how you've done it in the Midwest versus the Northeast or even the Southeast. So share some of that with us. So Lindsay, let's transition now to the National Deer Association and really the evolution of the organization from, QDMA to, the National Deer Association, and really give some of our audience insight to the work that you've done in the past, and then really where you're moving in the future to really, represent and support the whitetail community.
Yeah. So, the Quality Deer Management Association was around for over 30 years, founded in 1988. I've been there for 17 years, but 2020 was a transformational year for us, like it was for a lot of people.
Yep.
It hit the nonprofit conservation world pretty hard. Many of us, QDMA, just like many other conservation groups, relied on banquets for fundraising, and we could no longer hold banquets. So we had to figure out how to continue to raise the funds for our mission. But that brought up a lot of discussion about how we did business. We made some changes that will be for the better. We learned some ways to fundraise that don't involve banquets, and some other methods that we'll continue to use even after the pandemic's gone. But one of the things that came out of that through the changes that we went through, we were looking for a new CEO. We ended up talking to Nick Pinizzato, who was CEO of the Deer Alliance, which QDMA actually created some 5 years ago to work specifically on deer policy.
Got it.
And Nick had the idea. Nick was interested in being CEO, but he said, "Look, I've got an idea to merge these two groups back together. Let's become one again, and let's look at how we can change to address changing issues in deer hunting." And so that's what we did. A lot of people ask me, what does the merger of the Deer Alliance and QDMA really mean? To me, the best summary is we took the things that both groups did well and put them all under one roof. That's really it.
It makes complete sense.
Yeah, everything that people knew QDMA for, the things we were well known for, whether it's the Deer Steward program, which is our online education, online and in-person education courses, the Field to Fork hunter recruitment program that we created for adults, our educational, our magazine, our website, all the quality information we put out there on deer management and habitat. All of these things will continue. Our branches, our volunteers, our grassroots effort at the local level, all these things are still there.
Got it.
But we've brought in some strength in the policy and advocacy area through Nick Pinizzato and also Torin Miller, who came over from the Deer Alliance, working on good deer policy, the legislation that's out there. A lot of state legislators or legislatures are in session right now as we speak here in March. And, there a lot of times bills get introduced that don't necessarily do good things for deer and deer hunters. So we are there to make sure that those bills are addressed, that we come out opposed to those and we get deer hunters organized against those, but also to proactively push positive legislation for the things we want to do for deer and deer hunting. So we renamed ourselves the National Deer Association. We are still, still focused on many of the things we're still focused on, but we particularly want to continue to address some of these issues in deer hunting that are on the horizon that we're all well aware of, whether it's hunter numbers through our hunter recruitment programs, whether it's addressing the issue of chronic wasting disease, which is a growing threat in many areas. It's a threat to every one of us, whether we have that disease in our area yet or not. If you don't have it, you don't want it. And it's one of the things that we're really working to teach deer hunters how to help fight, whether they have it or not. You want to make sure that we don't spread this thing around any further than it's already been spread. So education and outreach, doing what I'm here doing with you today, helping, you're helping me get the word out to more deer hunters about wise food plot management. So helping folks, from a science-based approach, follow the science to do wise habitat and herd management, to have better hunting where they hunt. That will continue to be a big part of what we do. So those are some of the focus areas that we set goals for ourselves in to really work for wild deer and wild deer hunters.
No, that's outstanding. And I truly commend you guys for the work that you've done and the work that you're going to do. And, the thing that I would just encourage everybody is go to the website, and I'll let you hit it again here, but look and see how you can participate. All this work costs money. And so by joining and participating, what you're doing is you're helping fund this work, the legislative work, the studies, the research component, the education, all these things that you and your team are doing. So, if you can just guide people to how they could participate and support, because all that money goes to the work that you're doing. And it's important for us, just like, we talk about the NWTF and the people that are avid turkey hunters, and that organization does a lot of good work. This organization does incredible work. And so how can people get more involved, from even a volunteer, just researching information, and or how can they, become a member or participate to help fund a lot of the work that your organization is doing?
We've got so many ways people can get involved, from the small to the big, whether it's just becoming an annual member, $35 a year, you spend a lot more on.
Absolutely.
So
it's one meal.
Yeah. That's, going out to eat for yourself. Cheeseburger and fries cost you $35 these days. But, an annual membership, there's additional levels, whether you become a donor. We're a nonprofit, and we work off of the donations and memberships and the contributions that people make to us that further our mission. We have a 4-star charity rating from Charity Navigator. If you check them out, they're an independent group that evaluates all nonprofits that they can dig into to let you know whether they think those folks spend your money efficiently and wisely. We've got the highest rating from them, which is 4 stars. So that our dollars are going to deer. So become a member. Follow us on social media. All of our handles on all your favorite social media is @Deer Association.
Got it.
That's also our website, deerassociation.com. So social media @Deer Association. Give us a follow, give us a like, help share our information. Become a member today at deerassociation.com. And there's additional ways. Become a deer steward. Sign up for our online deer steward course. It's several hours of video instruction, covers everything from deer biology to habitat, all of it. All of the scientific information that we have available, some of the best experts in the world teaching you through that course how to become a better deer hunter and manager. So things like that, buying products from us. You can go to our online store and buy, on our topic today, quality food plots. The book,
perfect.
Which is a book we produced years ago.
Yep.
We constantly get questions by email and phone and social media about food plots. How do I do this? How do I do that? What's the best crop? And so several years ago, we said, why don't we just write a book on this and answer all these questions in one place?
You can go back and reference it all the time.
That's right. So buy a book from us. We've got apparel. We've got lots of different ways that you can support us by going to our website and checking out what we do. So thank you for that opportunity, Brian, to mention that.
Absolutely. Before we close it out, is there any other, tips, information that you want to make sure that everybody's aware of, that they can reference, through the website or the different portals? Just again, want to make sure everybody's aware of all the ways that they can tap into the, resource and education, and again, becoming, a partner of the association.
Yeah, quickest way, like I said, on social media at Deer Association
Perfect.
or deerassociation.com.
Perfect. Well, listen, that's going to wrap it up for us today. It's been a pleasure to speak with you, Lindsay. You've given some, great tips, great insight. I hope to continue the conversation with you guys, as, the year moves along. And what I would just encourage everybody to do is, rate, review, subscribe to, all the different SPYPOINT platforms and portals as well. And you can also follow, SPYPOINT on, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and just search SPYPOINT. So again, really an honor today, Lindsay, to speak with you. And I appreciate your expertise and insight, and wish you the best the rest of this year.
It's my pleasure, Brian. Thank you. And thanks to SPYPOINT for having me on and helping us get the word out about the Deer Association.
Good deal. Roger that. You have a great rest of the day.
You do the same. Take care.
You too.